Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today are some of the new Winter US Infantry from Warlord Games. These guys are brilliant. I'm going to touch on that quite quickly in a little review at the start of the video. If you're already sold on them, you can skip over that part. Now today what I'm going to do is really step back to some of the earlier methods that you would have seen on the channel, which is dry brush and a shade. The idea here is to get these guys on the table looking relatively good as quickly as possible. So we are going to some old school techniques. All of the paints for this one will be listed in the description below, and today we're going with the Army Painter because a couple of reasons. First, I recently got my hands on the Wargamer set, and as a Wargamer I thought, let's see what we can do with these. And second, some folks have mentioned finding it a little difficult to get their hands on Vallejo and what have you. So since I have done Winter US Infantry in Vallejo and Games Workshop and stuff similarly in the past, let's go with Army Painter this time. So let's get started.
So first of all, let's get a look at the miniatures themselves. Now, sometimes it's actually a little difficult to do a review because the kit itself is too good to pick on, and I'm a little worried that anything I say is going to sound like I'm gushing, but these are genuinely really very good. The Fallschirmjäger as well are in the same sort of vein of just remarkably well cast. When I clipped these guys out of the other frame to assemble them, the only thing I had to clean up were the little bits of scarring from my clippers. There is practically no mold lines or flash on these, so they go together really, really nicely. That's also not indicative of, this isn't a super secret prototype that I got sent. This is a production level sort of thing, so this should be what you get out of the box. The casting on them is great. The detail is really nicely done. They're certainly up there with some of the best plastic kits that are going. One of the things that I do really like as well is that there are finally 6 rifles, even 7 rifles, I think. There are enough rifles that everybody can have one. You don't have to make up extras with Thompsons and what have you. There are still 3 SMG options, and there's also a sniper rifle, and there's tons of little detail arms for things like your officers and NCOs, which I really appreciate. Coming into 3rd edition and Warlord talking about there being, normally at least a 2nd officer on the table for another platoon, having the option of making more officers out of the plastic kit that are a little bit unique is really nice. There's a bunch of heads, and honestly, if there's anything that I want to pick on, there are just 2 tiny things. They're extremely fussy, so don't let this sway you, but I feel like they're worth pointing out. I like having extra heads on a sprue, but I would have loved maybe some different equipment bags, some haversacks or something up along here. You've got 16 heads. That could have been 8. There are plenty, there's lots of variety in the US range as it is, but I'm not really complaining about getting more. Certainly, some of these guys are going to end up doing double service on my Rangers. The other thing that I want to grizzle about, and this is tiny, but some of these guys are in buckle boots, and some of them are in gaiters, which isn't a huge issue in and of itself. But if you want to use these guys as airborne, in the winter gear, airborne were never issued with the gaiters. They could be glider infantry, but it is an absolutely minuscule detail. And if you build these guys, you paint them up as airborne, put them on the table, and someone says to you, "Oh, they shouldn't have gaiters," you can doof them. But it is the only thing I can really think of to nitpick about this kit. It's really nice. The options are great. Yeah, actually very impressed. So let's chuck some together and paint the suckers. So once you've got your fellas assembled, first thing to do is to prime them. And here I've used Leather Brown from the Army Painter. Reason being, it is pretty much perfect for these late war jackets. It's it is fractionally lighter than they would have been in reality, but at this scale, that actually works in our favor. Now the first thing we're going to do is to base coat their skin, and here I'm using Jasper skin. This one will cover pretty well, but I'm still going to go over it with a second coat just to make sure that none of the primer is showing through. And the reason why I'm doing this now is that it'll let us tidy up much more easily as we go. The other reason too is that for miniatures, which I'm going to paint in this particular style, I find it easiest to break down your base coats into hard materials and soft materials. So hard stuff's going to be like his handy talkie, rifle, anything like that. And soft materials, well, anything else. Skin, boots, clothing, that sort of thing. So 2 coats later, we have the base of our skin. And of course, it goes without saying anything I'm doing to this fella, I'm doing to the others too. Now, this next step, I'm using army green for any bits of the uniform that are going to be visible. There are not going to be many. On most of these miniatures, it's just a little bit of the trousers. Don't worry too much if you do hit the tops of their boots or gaiters. Just try not to hit the jacket itself, but otherwise, this covers very well. Now that's a step you're going to simply fly through, trust me. What I'm going to turn to next, this is Patagon Pine, and as well as having a really fun name, this is a great color for your woolen, your grey-green woolen stuff. So scarves and any gloves that you decide to paint on these fellas. I did realize that I've given them all bare hands, which seems a little bit mean on my part, but this is a nice color just for this. If you're in a hurry, you can skip them, but I think that those little bits of scarf, they do add quite a bit to the miniature. Now what I've got, this is Tomb King Tan, and I'm just going to go over the gaiters in this. Now we get to flip them around, and we'll start on the webbing, pouches and what have you. For this, I have olive drab. A little bit of water in this, just to help it flow, and you'll see it still covers quite well. Bigger, flatter areas like the pouches, I will probably give it a second coat. But yeah, this is nice and simple. Now, strictly speaking, most of the canvas gear would be issued in big batches. So if you painted some of it green, it's likely that most of it's going to be green. However, your weapon straps, those that were canvas, you might have had those for a little bit longer. And there was a little bit of variation in colors for that canvas. So I'm using here, this is skeleton bone. And if there is a color which is maybe not as close as it could be to accurate, it's probably skeleton bone here. These should be maybe just a little bit more yellow, but for our purposes, this will be plenty. While the Garand, meanwhile, was ordinarily issued with a leather strap. So I've got here, this is Dryad brown, and it's a lovely middling brown with a bit of warmth to it. It is a beautiful base coat for your leather. So I'm also going to paint the map case that the officer is carrying with this as well. Now the boots, I'm going to paint in oak brown, which is a nice dark, slightly ruddy leatherish color. It's really good for this. Obviously the fellas who are wearing the buckle boots, just paint the whole thing. Whereas with the guys who've got the gaiters on, you want to be a little careful. Just paint the toe caps and the backs of the boots. Now, the last one of the soft base coats that we're going to apply might come as a bit of a surprise, and that's why I've saved it until this point. What I have is Barbarian flesh. And I'm going to quite quickly just block out most of his skin using this as the base coat. I want to leave just a little bit of that Jasper skin in the recesses. This is going to be the predominant skin tone. Now, don't worry if you do end up filling in like between his fingers and what have you. It's not going to matter too much. This is there mostly to add just a bit of volume to the faces. What I've got now is pale sand, and you don't really have to go out and buy another color for this. You could use white, but for any of the covered helmets, I think something that's not quite white will work a little better, give us something that we can do to highlight it later. And now, while not technically a base coat, any bits that you have splashed over or made a mess of, just grab yourself some leather brown and you can tidy up and straighten out some of the belts if you have to do that as well. So after your tidy up is finished, you should have something that looks like this. Now what I've got here is a little dry brush, and anything will work here, and a bit of ancient stone. I'm going to work that into the bristles And then I really want to rub this off on a bit of kitchen towel until there's almost nothing left. This is a nothing dry brush, trust me. So once I'm prepared, I'm just going to lightly flick along the edge of the base, and you see I'm barely changing that at all. What I'm going to do now is go across areas of detail on his coat, on the leather, on his webbing, on his skin, on all of these soft base coats, just to build up a little bit of a highlight and give us some depth to our uniform. Now you're going to need to dip back into your paint intermittently, re-prepare your brush, and each time make sure that you're just lightly testing on the edge there for what you'll leave. So very carefully at first until you're satisfied with what you're leaving behind. Going against the grain as much as possible. Let's add a bit of color to our uniform. Now that looks awful, doesn't it? There's a good reason why I've always started putting miniatures at the start of the video. But from here we can now start doing our hard base coats, and we're going to start off with the wood on the weapons. Now here I am using Tree Ancient, and honestly every time I paint American weapons there is a question, there is a debate about the right color, and this looks about right to my eyes. You can use something else if you feel these should be slightly lighter. Now we're going to move on to the painted metal stuff. So this will be things like helmets, grenades, bazookas, anything like that. I have here woodland camo, and this will cover quite well. Probably got way too much on my brush there. But yeah, just quickly over all of that painted green stuff. Then with a little bit of matte black, we're going to finish off, funnily enough, the black bits. So take your time with this. You want to be fairly careful because at this stage, the less tidy up you have to do, the better. This, of course, is going to depend on what he's carrying. So Thompson, Garand, and one carbine are all going to be different. Now give all of those base coats a little bit of time to dry, and then we're going to mix up our shade. What I've got first of all is Strong Tone, and I'm going to put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 drops of that. And then Speed Paint Medium. I'm pointing this out specifically because I'm not doing a half and half mix. We've got 5 drops of Strong Tone. I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4 drops of Speed Paint Medium. So that's the ratio I'm going to use. I am going to mix up a little bit more here. Now there does exist the option, if you want to use this neat, you can do. But I like a little bit of, I like to thin my shades down because otherwise I tend to find they overpower the colors quite quickly. Now I'm going to apply this over the entire miniature. When you're popping it over areas like his coat, try and keep your brush moving in the same direction. It'll help the way it pulls. If you do get any big chunky bits like this, just shift it away while your brush is still wet. So once I've doused these guys in my mix here of shade, I'll give them about half an hour to dry and see if I'm right. Has this saved the day? And yep, there we go. We are done. I will dry brush the top of his helmet with a little bit of Tomb King tan, but otherwise the only other thing I am going to do is to hit it with a matte varnish, and then I'm going to base them. I'll point you to a previous video on painting Winter Americans for how to do that, because it's bog standard. I'm going to do the same thing again for them. But yeah, that's done in a fraction of the time it would ordinarily take me. So once these guys are finished, let's get a look at the little squad whizzing around together.
And so there at last, our US infantry are complete. Now if you do want to go the route of adding a little bit of snowflock to them, what I'd recommend is that you think about where snow will collect naturally and where motion will knock it off. So you'll see I've put a little bit up across their shoulders, on their backs, on their helmets, but down their arms and where the NCO who's kneeling down has lifted his arm, that's where I figure most of that snow is going to have fallen off. But that's for you to have a play around with. Add as much as you like, but I'd suggest don't go too heavy with it. So again, thank you to Warlord for letting me have a couple of sprues of these guys. I've had a lot of fun, and they are really brilliant. Like I said, it's It's really hard to review something when all you want to do is gush, but gush I must. So there you have it. As well, thank you very much to Exit23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paint and glue, including my wonderful producers who are showing up on screen now and who I usually refer to as gorgeous. Oops, I'll have to remember that next time. You are all gorgeous, I promise. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.